Hello, and welcome to this year's Festive Tech Calendar. My name is Callon Campbell, and today I'll be speaking to you about how you can modernize your app configuration and feature management of Azure App Configuration. Okay, I'm a five-time Microsoft MVP specializing in Azure. I have over 20 years experience developing Microsoft technologies. I'm very passionate about using serverless, cloud-native application development, and modernizing and moving to the cloud. I'm a speaker at local community events and meetups, including the Global Azure Bootcamp. I blog over at theflyingmaverick.com, so please check me out, subscribe, like me. And I'm also the organizer of Canada's Technology Triangle.net user group, which is located in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. Okay, so looking at the agenda. First off, I'll try and keep the slides minimum, but I'm going to do a quick overview of just what is Azure App Configuration. I'll then show you how you can use it as a centralized configuration store for all your applications in Azure. I'll talk about high availability, look at real-time updates. I'm going to have a bunch of demos throughout each section, and then I'll wrap things up. Okay, so what is Azure App Configuration? So Azure App Configuration provides a service that's centrally managed and allows you to store your application settings and do feature flag management. Why would you want to use Azure App Configuration? Well, as I said, it's a fully managed service. You can set one up in minutes. It's very flexible in terms of key representations and mappings. It provides options for doing for tagging, and with labels, and I'll also show you that when we get to the demo. Allows you to do point-in-time replay of any settings changes, so allows you to go and audit who changed your settings and when they changed it. Allows you to easily roll back. If you're into feature flag management and development, then it provides a dedicated UI for this. Very, very powerful. From an operational perspective, allows you to compare two sets of configurations or create a custom defined dimension. And has enhanced security. You can use Azure Managed Identities, so connect your application and Azure App Config with Managed Identities. You can pull in secrets from Key Vault. Very, very secure. Encryption of the information is encrypted at rest and in transit. And it provides native integration with popular frameworks. So today in my demos, I'll be using .NET, but it provides integration with other frameworks too. It's also a complement to Azure Key Vault. You might be wondering, well, I have Key Vault in my organization. Why would I want to stand up another service? So Azure App Configuration is, as it says, it's meant for configuration, and Key Vault is really meant for secrets and whatnot. But they both work together, which is really, really nice. I touched on it supports feature flags, so allows you to store all your feature flags in one central place. It supports the native .NET feature flag data schema. Feature flags are typically a binary value, which can be on or off. You can also use more advanced scenarios with filters. Applying to users, devices, browsers, geo, time of window. So it really allows you to sort of do that A/B testing with this. Quickly, some best practices. So you want to manage your app configs and sort of key groupings. So think of it as a key value pair. You could dump everything in there, but you want to sort of group things around context of, let's say, applications. So a good strategy for that is to use key prefixes and or labels. So when we get into the demo, I'll show you what I mean by that. You can also reduce the number of requests made to app configuration. So polling versus push. So you can actually push out your changes to your applications rather than your applications constantly polling. There is caching provided also from your application. You can very easily import all your configs into Azure App Config if you already have them defined in JSON files, XML files. It will support multi-region deployment. And it's really handy to use inside of your CI/CD. So you can actually pull down configs, inject them into your application as you're deploying it out. So it has that perfect state right from ground zero. A few scenarios. So mainly I'll be touching on really centralizing the management and distribution of your configuration data across different environments, geographies. Also look into dynamically changing those application settings and pushing that out right down to your application without any need to redeploy or restart the application. And we can control features availability in real time. Okay, so that brings us to our first demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an Azure App Configuration resource, and then I have an Azure Function application, and I'm going to take that and configure it to use Azure App Configuration. So let's dive into that demo. So coming over to the portal, I have a config, so I'll fall back to it if I need to, but I'll just walk through creating a new one. I'm going to go to the marketplace. Okay, I'm going to create a new Azure App Configuration. I'm going to put it in Canada Central. That's where I'm located. For pricing, they have a free tier and then a standard tier. So free, definitely great from a dev, QA, trying kicking the tires out before you want to use it. Standard tier, obviously more for production scenario. I'll just go with the standard tier because I'm not going to keep this resource very long. Couple other things to make note here from a geo replication. This is something in preview recently. Definitely, when I get into the geo slides, I'll talk about it. So I'm going to leave it off for now. And for recovery options, we can specify how often we want to recover and whether or not we want to enable purge protection. So I'll turn that on. Networking, I'm going to just leave it automatic for now, but obviously you would want to lock this down inside of your Azure environment. Tagging, I'm not going to tag, but I strongly recommend you tag when you deploy these things in your environment. Okay, and this should be a quick deployment. Okay, and while we look at that, I'll bring in my code. So we have here Visual Studio 2022. I have a simple Azure function. Let's see, go into show you the project file. So it's a .NET 6 v4 runtime using in process, and I have just a simple welcome function. Again, out of the box, it just sort of restructured the code, but it's using the Open API specification on my endpoint. I've set it up with dependency injection. So if we go to our startup.cs, I basically just configured my configuration builder and just added that as a singleton. So no other code. So let's see, it's portal's done. So I'll come back here and finish this off. So here's our instance. Here's our endpoint that we would want to use. So we can copy that when we want to. When I get to the next demo, I'll copy that. But a little bit about that. We can come in, access keys. This is where you want to get your primary, secondary keys. You can also get read-only keys for your application. If you want to scale it up, I already picked the standard tier, but you can see the difference between them. So with free, it's 1 per region. Otherwise, you have unlimited. You have a much higher storage allotment on standard, much higher revision history, 30 days. And your resource quota is also much, much higher at 30,000 per hour. If you do hit this quota, let's say you're on the free tier and you hit 100,000 on that day, you're just going to get a 429 that says until the end of the day. Same thing for production, but this is a per hour basis. There is no SLA on the free versus there is a 3 nines availability on standard. And then we get into some of the different pricing. The geo-replication, again, this is something you can turn on right at the beginning when you set it up. If not, you can come back in later on and turn that on. So I can come in here and pick a region. Canada, there is no Canada East as usual. So I'll do West, West, US 2. Give it a name, West, US 2. Okay, and so all you can see there, the endpoint, it's going to add in a suffix to the end of this part of the URL. So not to the very end, but just to this part of the host. Okay, and I can go ahead and create that while I'm in the portal. Wait for that to finish. Okay, if we go into identity, this is obviously where you'd want to set up either system assigned or user assigned managed identity. Encryption, you can bring your own customer managed keys. By default, it's Microsoft managed. And yeah, I'll come into some of the operational bits later. Actually, you know what I want to do is I'll do the import now. First, let's go to the code. Okay, so coming back to the code. Sorry about jumping around. So I have my application. I'm going to run it to show you what it's doing. It's a simple hello world. Okay, I'm going to hit this endpoint. Okay, so you can see it's picking up just a very simple hello. I say welcome to my application. Have a version, have the function runtime, just current date time. Region, something I like to do when I run in the cloud. I like to know what region it's running in. Obviously, I'm running locally. There is no region, so that's why that is null. And if we go back to code. So now what I want to do is I want to add in some endpoints. I want to configure my application now to talk to the cloud. So I'm going to change branches now to my demo 1. And this is the demo. So if you're following along, I'll provide all the source code at the end of the presentation. I have a link. Let me rebuild this. Okay, rebuild is successful. So let me start off with the namespace or the using packages I've added in. So I've added in Azure Identity. This is for managed identity integration. I've added in mainly this one is what you want to add in. So Microsoft extensions configuration, Azure App Configuration. And I also added Microsoft.feature management. And then my secrets, I am using my user secret store for the connection string, so that's why this is here. And the other, these two just had previously in the previous demo, had I shown that. Okay, so if I come down to my local settings file, I have no real secrets in here. I just have the link to my other demo. So let me change that over now. Okay, so I copied that in. And I do need to go update my connection string because this part of the demo I'm using a connection string for this part of the demo running locally. I ran into some issues earlier today before the recording. For managed identity, I spun my wheels a little too much on that, so I'll just use a connection string. But the code does show both the connection string and the managed identity scenario. So I'll just do this off screen, get my connection string from here. Okay, if I update my code, talk to this. Now if I come into my trigger now, so you'll see I have a welcome trigger. If we come and if we come into our welcome trigger, first off, a dependency injection now, I'm injecting an iFeature manager, and I'm injecting an iConfiguration refresher. Basically, the only thing that's changed in my welcome function is I'm going to make a configuration refresh, and what this will do is it will signal the configuration to go download any keys if the cache expiry has hit. Otherwise, it'll just be used whatever's internally in cache. And then what I've done is I'm going to pull this value for my configuration. So what I'm doing here is this is my application prefix. I call it demo function sentinel. So let's go add this to the portal. Okay, I'm going to go down into Configuration Explorer. You can see here I have nothing. The few options that you have available to you is either key value or key vault reference. So I'll do key value. Okay, I'm going to give it a name. Make sure there's no prefix or postfix special characters that got copied in. I'll give it a value of 0. Label, I have no labels for now, so I'll come back to the label and just explain that in a second. So I'm going to hit apply. So here's my value. I can come in, show values. I have a value of 0. If I want to add another value, then I can add a value of A, and I'll call this lab A environment. We'll have a value of A. So you can see now I have the same configuration called demo function :sentinel. And when there is no label provided, the value will be 0. And if I pass in a label of lab A, I'll get A as a value. And you can add as many of these as you want. So I can call this B, give this as a lab B label. And this is really great when you want to test different environments out or have different values for a particular application setting without having to duplicate application settings. So you notice I'm not creating Sentinel A or Sentinel B and having 3 different values. I just have one value, and from code I'll control which one I want to pull down. Okay, so if I go back to my code now, I'm expecting to pull this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to eject that, and I'll show it here in my welcome response. And what the Sentinel is, it's sort of a trigger. So when you go and update your Azure function app or Azure App Configuration, I can add in another value. I'll call it demo function test 1. Copy this. Test 1. Okay, I'll create another one. Test 2. Okay, so this application now in Azure App Configuration has really 3 configuration settings that all have the prefix of demo function. So what I want to do is, if from my application I don't want it to keep refreshing every time a single value changes, what I want to do is when the Sentinel changes, then go refresh and pull down all the configs related to that. So I'll show you now how that gets set up. So I'll go into my startup.cs. You can see I've added in basically an iConfiguration refresher. The builder was already there. So when I configure my application, I want to pull in this environment setting, so my primary store. I want to make it configurable how long this cache should before it expires. And I also want to pull this an environment label. So for my local, I could give myself a different label than, let's say, something running in the cloud. When I configure it, I have 2 ways. So I have the app connection string way. So this is what I'm pulling right now. And the other way would be using managed identity. So definitely recommend using managed identity when you go in the cloud. And when I get to one of the later demos, that's how I have it set up currently in Azure, is with managed identity. Everything else is pretty much the same. But you can see basically I'm pulling in everything that says demo function : star I can also pull in an environment label, so that will override whatever this is. And I can do multiple versions of this. Maybe I'm using Twilio in my application. I want to pull in some Twilio generic configs. You can pull in, put all kinds of configurations in here. It doesn't have to be specific to your app. You could pull in something that maybe that's more generic across many applications. So you could do something like that. I want to configure my refresh, how it wants to do. So this is the key that it's going to scan and keep an eye on. So whenever that value changes, it will pull down the changes automatically the next time the cache expires. So the key there is only when the cache expires. So if my cache is 5 minutes, it's not going to try and pull down the new Sentinel until at the 5 minute mark. At the 5 minute mark, if the Sentinel value did change, so let's say it was 0 and it went to 1, then it will refresh everything in the cache. So have refresh all is true. You could say no and pull down in specific stuff you wanted. I also configure to use feature flags. Again, you can specify what environment you want to use and also the cache expiry for that as well. These two can be the same, or you could have different values. And then finally, I want to add in my configuration refresher and my feature management for this configuration, so my application is aware. So let's see, this one here will show welcome. I added in 2 other features here to show a specific message. So here I'm going to pull in demo function message. So let's go fire that up. Hello. Okay, no label. And the other function I created is showing the beta feature functionality. So this is the feature flag. And again, I'm just very lightly touching on some of this. You can actually use beta features, actually in the actual here if you wanted. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get refresh. So you always want to call refresh whenever you're going to go and start accessing anything inside of Azure App Config. Otherwise, you're just always pulling from whatever's cached locally. And then all I'm going to do is say feature manager is enabled, and I'm going to pass in a name of feature. So name of the feature is just, in this case, it's going to be beta. So let's not do that, but let's go copy this and add this into Azure. So I'm going to go over to now feature manager. And I'm going to create a new feature. So by default, I'm going to turn this on for true. I'm going to call it beta. And I could give it a label if I wanted to. I could give it this is demo feature. I'm not going to use any filters, but if I wanted to use filters, you can see very quickly here. I can say targeting. I could target to specific users or groups. I can put percentage. I could do a time window, so when the feature comes on, when it goes off and expires, or I can do something custom. With custom, really you're doing sort of like an XML JSON version of doing that. Okay, so I don't want to use filtering at this time. I'm just going to leave it as is, and I'll hit apply. So there's my beta. If I want to turn it on, turn it off, it's just very quickly I can do this, just like that. Okay, if I go back to my configuration explorer, you will see, let me see, show values, manage view. There was a way where you can come in here and actually show your features in here at the same time. It makes it look confusing, so I often don't do it, but it's handy to do if you want it. Okay, going back to my application now. I think everything is set up properly, so let me build and run this. Okay, so we have my new functions have shown up. Come back here, I'm going to refresh my welcome, so we should see the Sentinel show up. So Sentinel showed up as 0. So that's a really handy way of knowing that your configuration is properly wired up, especially if you're doing managed identities. It gets hairy sometimes. Someone from a coding perspective could go in and change a default. If I go back to startup, here we could put in optional. And optional by default is false. And so what that will do, if there is an error, it will show the error. Exception is thrown. If someone were to change this and put true, all the errors are suppressed and your app just keeps on going, but the integration with app config is broken. So sometimes it's hard to troubleshoot that. So what I like to do is put in some information from my function so I can see from runtime what's happening. So here I know it's wired up. I also know what version, what Sentinel or what state it is right now. So if someone goes and changes it to 1, I'll notice my application is not going to pick that up per se until the cache expires, which I have it set for a few minutes. So if you go to my Sentinel now, I can come to 0, edit this, I'll put in 1. Okay, if we go back to my app, refresh, I'm not going to see the 1. Not until the cache expires. Okay, some of the other endpoints that I had was so show message, so you can see that now. Hello to Azure App Config. And show beta features, you can see my feature is on. If I go to my beta feature and I go and turn that off, I come back, you can see that that state hasn't been reflected yet until the cache goes and expires. Okay, if I rerun the application, I'll obviously get those that information updated right away. Okay, so that's demo 1. Let me go back to slides. Okay, I didn't do key vault reference. My bad on that. So key vault, if I want to add something that new in, I don't have a key vault created to wire it up, but it would be add key vault reference, give it a key label, and now I want to pick where it's coming from, what resource group. You pick your key vault, pick your secret, and hit apply. It doesn't actually bring your secret into app config. It's literally just a pointer. So you have to go into key vault, and if you're using managed identity, you have to give permission to your function app to say this function is allowed to do a get from key vault. So it's not doing a get. So although the application is reading all the configs, including secrets from app config, it's actually just a proxy to key vault. Cancel that. Go back to my slides. Okay, so in terms of high availability, so Azure App Configuration is currently a regional service, so it doesn't have failover and whatnot. You can't set up multiple regions to other. You can't set up automatic failover to other regions. And you also can't have your application be cross-redundant by having multiple app configuration stores. So there is a way around that. So coming from the documentation for Microsoft, you can create multiple app configuration stores in different regions. And then you can update your app to support both stores. So here's one example I'm showing when I set up my configuration builder. I can pull in, you always want to pull in the secondary store first and then pull in the primary store. In this case, this is a bad screenshot, but it had optional to true. Bad, that should be false. Anyways, this will wire up both config stores, and then if the primary store ever went down, it would fail over automatically to the secondary store, and vice versa, from the application perspective. Okay, and then since this is a specific region, you need to manually keep your stores in sync. So the first option for doing so is doing manual. So you can go into your primary store, do a backup, go to your secondary store, do a restore. It's manual. You know, this thing's not going to get done in real time whenever changes happen. So option 2, preferred. That's actually the preferred method currently. Is setting up an automatic backup. So the Microsoft Docs go into great detail of how to do this. So I'm not going to cover it per se, but I'll just go over the diagram. So what you're doing is any changes that you make to your primary config store, you're going to leverage Azure Event Grid, and you're going to send a notification and store that change inside of a storage queue. You're going to have a timer function, and it's going to run, and it's going to go and pick up anything from the queue, and it's going to go and update the secondary store. So those updates are near time, depending how you set up your Azure function. Pretty much, Event Grid will fire pretty much right away, put that data into Azure storage queue, and your function will go and pick it up on demand. And then there's option 3. So option 3 is actually currently in preview. So this is turning on geo-replication support. This is in preview. When this comes out of preview, this will actually be the recommended solution going forward, because it sort of gets rid of that whole messiness that you see right now in terms of setting up a secondary store, managing it, setting up a function app, stores, event grid. It all works great, but it's just extra infrastructure or services in Azure that you have to manage and maintain and monitor. Okay, so demo 2 is I'm going to go and show now enabling geo support. Okay, so moving on to, that's fine, demo 2. Okay, so I have the same set of functions in terms of features. So what's really changing is in my startup. What I've done now is I've added in a secondary store endpoint. From my config perspective, again, I'm using the connection string. If I didn't want to use a connection string, I'll put that to 1. Then I could come in here to manage identity. So one thing to notice when you're looking at the enable geo replication support, again, it is in preview, so you do have to use a version 5.3-.0-preview of the NuGet package or later, so it won't show up right away. And you have to use Azure AD authentication to connect for your replicas, so you can't use a connection string at this time. If failover occurs, it will happen on these conditions. So either your service is unavailable, so like a 500 or above error code, any kind of network connectivity issues, or you get throttled from one region, it will automatically go to the other region. Throttling or failover won't happen if you get any kind of authentication failures. So the way this works is you want to provide an array of endpoints. So I have my primary, secondary store. You'll then, when you connect, you'll pass in your endpoints, and then this is your managed identity. So I'm just going to use a default Azure credential, and that's it. If you wanted to add in support for key vaults, I don't have that section in right now, but you would just add it in here. Configure key vault, and then you want to pass in your identity for that. Okay, so this one, again, my managed identity support is not working locally, so I've already deployed this version of the app to the cloud, and I'll show you how that's running. Okay, so that was the one that we just created earlier in the call, in this meeting, presentation, I should say, my God. Here's the original one that I had set up. Not access keys, so geo-replication, I did have that turned on, same region, West US 2. If I come into configuration, you can see here I just have what's being used. I have 2, I have welcome to Azure App Config, and then I have my feature manager turned on. for beta. So none of the other settings that I add. And if we go to we go to my actual function app. So this is demo 2 version of the code. So you can see here, show beta feature, so message, welcome. If we come down into configuration, let me go back to code and show you that config again. So from a configuration perspective, of course I have a just leave the original one that was there. Okay, so for my configuration, again, you don't want to check in your local settings file. In this case, I am just for demo purposes. This resource is going to be deleted very shortly after this presentation. But in here, all I did was added in a secondary store. There was my cache, so for 2 minutes, and I'm not using an environment label. So what I want to do is I actually want to copy these 4 configs and put them in my function app. They're the only configs I need to have. So you can see here I've already added them in. Azure App Config, cache timeout, primary store, secondary store, and that's it. Okay, and I've gone into my function for identity. So I've already set up a manage identity here. And if I go back to my app config, and I go into access control, we can see here I've added in app configuration data reader for that particular function app. Okay, so that's how the two are going to talk together. So using the endpoint, so no secrets between everything. It's using manage identity to talk. And if I go back to new my endpoint, so here's the one locally, here's the one in the cloud. So you can see now my region is Canada Central, configuration Sentinel 2. Here is the show message, welcome to Azure App Config. And here is the beta, whether it's on or off, and that beta feature is on. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation and move along to the next demo. Okay, and that is real-time updates. So I mentioned earlier that you can actually have, instead of your application constantly polling, so in my case, it's going to, after, I had it set for 2 minutes as an expiry locally, but in the cloud, I put 900 seconds, so 15 minutes. So after 15 minutes, the app is automatically going to go refresh its cache of whatever is an app config. When I say whatever is an app config, it's really going based off that prefix. So demo function : star and demo function : star and the label that is associated with the app. So whatever, that's only what it's caching. It's not caching the entire app config resource itself. So a better way is have, whenever those changes do happen, especially with the Sentinels, to have those pushed down to your application. What I'm going to do for that is I'm going to use Azure Event Grid. So I'm going to get notified whenever the Sentinel changes. I'm going to push that down. And then I'm going to have my function app. I'm going to set up an Event Grid consumer, and it's going to go and refresh my functions for that. Okay, so let's go and do a demo and show you that. This part of the demo I've already wired up, given time restrictions. So here I have Event Grid. Here's my demo. I can show you, if you haven't used Event Grid, very, very simple to do. Give it a name. I'm going to use the Event Grid schema, but you have other options. My topic is going to be app configuration. I can be triggered on, I like to use both, but you can just say on what's modified. And then I'm going to give it an endpoint, so I say Azure function. And it will just automatically go and wire up based on my resource group. Here's my function that's already built and deployed. So I already have this running. So let me go and show you now. Okay, so anytime I make a change, this value should be automatically pushed down. So let me just set up this. I'll show you the code. Okay, on demo 3 now. My changes, nothing's changed here in my configuration. My startup here, nothing has changed. So the only thing that's really changed from a code perspective is I added in a new function. So this is an event grid trigger. If you want to manually test it out locally, not in Azure, they give you a URL to manually test this. Essentially all I'm doing is I'm going to pull in the configuration refresher dependency, and then I'm just going to say set dirty. So it's going to invalidate my cache, and the application is just going to reload. So let's go see how that is right now. So again, this is 15 minutes for cache. I'm going to run it, still 2. So I'll go change 2 to 3. Okay, and well, actually what I'll do is I'll show you both. So I'm going to edit this, take 2. Okay, that's not going to get updated until this gets updated. So again, my application is, before I hit save, is focused on that down here, right? So it's registering on this key. So only when that sentinel value changes is it going to go refresh all my configs. Okay, so I'm going to hit 3. Go to my application now. Still 2. Okay, and just waiting for the event grid to kick in. So this is a few seconds. It's near time. Of course, it feels like forever when you're doing a demo. There you go, 3. So again, my application never rebooted, never restarted. The configuration was injected into it, and now that's what's in cache. If I come to the other end, there's my take 2. I didn't change the feature, but again, we'll show that. So really, really nice to push configurations down. Now you might be saying, okay, this is good for app or functions, app service. What about legacy applications that you have? So one nice thing that you can do is you can set up a proxy, so to speak. So you can actually talk to app config through an SDK. If that doesn't work, you can talk to it through an API endpoint. Like you can talk to it through the app config endpoint, like API directly. Another way would be when you want to add in sort of the caching and real-time updates, is you could go create an API, and then now have all your lower-end old applications. They could be console apps or old web apps that just can't use the SDK, and you can have your applications talk to this sort of proxy API, and that proxy is going to provide all the app configs, feature flags, and be updated in real time, just like my function app is doing. So that's one way how you could go and leverage this from other applications, especially older ones. Okay, so sort of wrapping up my presentation now. Best practices, key grouping, so use prefixes and labels. You sort of want to reduce your requests made to app config, so polling versus push. You want to have those configs pushed down rather than you constantly polling for them. You can go into import your configuration. I didn't show that, but I'll quickly jump back to the portal. I got a minute left, and I can show you that. Okay, in terms of resources, documentation, I have links. This obviously doesn't help, but the presentation will be on my GitHub along with the source code. So there's my link to my GitHub for all the source code. The presentation is not currently there, but I will upload that today by end of the day. If you want to connect to me, if you have any questions, reach out to me directly on email, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and then you have my GitHub for any other presentations that I've done on Azure over the years, especially the topics I've done for the Global Azure Bootcamp. Thank you so much. Happy holidays, everyone. Hope you all have a great new year. It was really fun doing this festive talk this year. Okay. Oh, I wanted to go back to here and show this quickly. Okay, so in terms of operations, so I've talked about Configuration Explorer, Feature Manager. If I want to restore, I can restore from a specific point in time. Let's say from yesterday. I don't know if this is going to work because I just stood this up. Oh yeah, there you go. So I can turn these on so you can see what's new. So if I restored it yesterday, this didn't exist. So it's going to undo. If I want to compare, you could compare across stores. So you know, hey, your primary zone, secondary zone. Doesn't work when you do enable geo-replication. So that's all internally managed by Microsoft or Azure. But if you had done option 2 where you're automatically managing it, then you could compare across stores, and you could go across resources, specific date and time. If I want to do import and export, so I can export my what I have now. I'll turn it to configuration file. I can export to an app config or to an app service. I can specify date and time, maybe a particular label. I can put the separator, so that's where I'm doing like the demo function : so that was my separator. So I just want to narrow it down to a subset of my configuration. If I don't do that, it will just export the whole thing. And import is very similar too. So what do I want to import? I can import from any of these services right now. So another app config from an app service or a config file. I can go from .NET, Java. From .NET, I have JSON, YAML as options, and then I can go pick my file. My configs are already in here, so I'm not going to go reduplicate it. But that's it. So very, very powerful. I find this is often an overlooked resource in Azure. Really, really powerful. But it allows you to centralize all your configs into one place or a few places at least. Easily allows you to integrate key vaults. And you can push out those changes to your application without requiring any kind of downtime or restarts. I didn't show any CI/CD integration, but there are options from CI/CD, so you can actually pull in values during your CI/CD, set up the actual code so that when your app runs, it's configured properly the first time. It doesn't have to go and pull down from Azure. It could be a VM that doesn't have access to this publicly. It's more in a lockdown scenario, so you can actually push out the proper configs through CI/CD. Okay, thank you so much, and have a great festive calendar for the rest of the year. Thank you.